Sylvester Stallone walked onto the stage with the confident charisma that had defined his decades-long legacy, offering a warm smile to the cheering audience. But even as he settled into his seat across from Jimmy Kimmel, there was a noticeable edge in his posture, as if he sensed something unusual in the way Jimmy held his cards. Jimmy opened with casual questions about Stallone's latest film, asking about his training routine and the emotional process behind his character work, but the moment Sylvester answered with depth, Jimmy cut in with a sarcastic remark, earning a hesitant laugh from the crowd. Sylvester paused, giving a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes, clearly catching the tone Jimmy was setting. Jimmy pressed harder, slipping in a comment suggesting Stallone was reliving his glory days, and Sly leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but firmer as he countered that he was constantly evolving, not stuck in the past. The audience felt the shift, sensing tension brewing beneath Stallone's measured responses as Jimmy tried to steer the interview toward controversy rather than conversation. Jimmy then pivoted toward Stallone's well-publicized disputes with certain studios, hinting that the actor had become too controlling over his projects, framing him as someone who clung obsessively to ownership and creative authority. Sylvester responded with thoughtful detail about the importance of artistic respect and fair treatment in Hollywood, but Jimmy smirked and twisted the topic into a joke about Stallone being unwilling to share credit. The crowd's reaction was mixed, with some laughing nervously while others shifted uncomfortably. Stallone's expression darkened just a fraction, enough to show he didn't appreciate the mischaracterization, and he clarified that protecting one's work wasn't arrogance but principle. Jimmy interrupted again, telling him not to take it so seriously, which only deepened the tension as Sylvester sat back, jaw tightening, realizing that the interview was becoming less about his work and more about Jimmy's attempts to provoke a reaction. Jimmy then brought up Stallone's long-standing relationships with certain co-stars, spinning rumors of on-set conflicts into casual gossip, and suggesting Stallone had a reputation for being difficult. Sylvester chuckled, but it was a humor-laced with warning kind of laugh as he corrected Jimmy, explaining that his sets were built on respect and discipline. But Jimmy wasn't satisfied. He pressed further, reading out a quote from an anonymous source claiming Stallone had outgrown his relevance, prompting audible gasps from the studio audience. Sylvester's eyebrows lifted in surprise, not because he hadn't heard the rumors before, but because Jimmy had chosen to air them so boldly in front of a live audience. He responded with cutting clarity, saying that anonymous voices rarely came from people brave enough to stand behind their words, and Jimmy shrugged, brushing it off as entertainment. Sylvester's stare sharpened, and even those backstage sensed the atmosphere thickening. Trying to maintain control, Jimmy shifted topics abruptly, asking whether Stallone's recent streaming projects were signs that his theatrical career was fading. Sylvester laughed dryly, nodding that the industry was evolving and adapting to audience needs, but Jimmy still jabbed, suggesting Stallone's new work felt like a retirement hobby. The comment landed poorly and the audience murmured in discomfort. Sylvester leaned forward, voice lower, stating that he poured the same intensity into every project regardless of platform, but Jimmy waved a dismissive hand, turning the moment into yet another punchline. Stallone's expression hardened visibly as he told Jimmy that belittling someone's craft wasn't wit but insecurity disguised as humor. Jimmy seemed rattled but continued pushing, and every exchange became sharper, as if both men were now fully aware they were no longer participating in a typical late-night interview. Things escalated further when Jimmy brought up Stallone's family, touching on personal matters Stallone rarely discussed publicly. The second Jimmy made a flippant remark about Sly's daughter's social media success overshadowing his own fame, Stallone froze completely, the smile wiped from his face. The audience went silent, sensing a line had been crossed. Sylvester stated firmly that his family was off-limits, that he didn't come to the show to have his loved ones used for cheap humor, but Jimmy shrugged and said the audience loved real talk. Stallone's eyes narrowed with unmistakable seriousness and his voice turned colder as he reminded Jimmy that respect wasn't optional. Jimmy attempted to backtrack with another joke, but when it fell flat, he tried to justify it as harmless banter. Sylvester didn't buy it, and the energy on stage shifted from tense to volatile. Trying to cover the awkwardness, Jimmy returned to Stallone's career choices, but in doing so delivered another veiled insult, implying that Sylvester's recent projects only thrived because nostalgia kept them alive rather than genuine talent. Stallone tilted his head slightly, absorbing the jab, then responded with controlled intensity, explaining that his longevity came from adapting, reinventing, and refusing to be boxed in by others' limitations. Jimmy smirked and said something about actors refusing to face reality, and Stallone's composure thinned. He reminded Jimmy that dismissing someone's decades of work for a cheap laugh revealed more about the host than the guest. The audience murmured again, siding increasingly with Stallone as Jimmy's attempts at humor kept falling flat. Stallone's voice grew sharper, the irritation beneath the surface now visible to everyone. Sensing he was losing the room, Jimmy made one final attempt at steering the narrative, claiming that Stallone, tough guy persona made him too sensitive to criticism. Sylvester reacted instantly, eyes locking onto Jimmy with a stare that froze the entire studio. He clarified that criticism was welcome but disrespect disguised as comedy was not, and he was tired of people assuming his on-screen characters defined his real-life temperament. Jimmy tried to interrupt again, but Sylvester continued, calling out the host for intentionally trying to provoke him for ratings. Jimmy's face tightened, clearly not expecting Stallone to say it outright. The audience reacted with soft gasps, realizing Stallone was no longer playing along with the interview's format. Even the crew hesitated, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let the moment play out. Jimmy, visibly irritated, delivered a snide remark about Stallone storming off like a diva, intending it as a final blow. But instead of getting angry, Sylvester's expression changed into something far more powerful, calm, decisive clarity. He told Jimmy that walking away from disrespect wasn't dramatic, it was necessary. The cool firmness in his tone sent a shockwave through the studio, and even Jimmy seemed to realize he had gone too far. Stallone said that conversations built on mockery weren't worth participating in, especially when the host had no intention of listening. Jimmy tried to salvage the moment with forced humor, but the crowd didn't laugh. Stallone placed his hands on the armrests of his chair, preparing to stand, and the silence felt like a spotlight intensifying around them. Stallone stood up slowly, adjusting his jacket with calm resolve as Jimmy tried calling after him, insisting that he was just joking. Sylvester didn't even glance back at first, instead addressing the audience directly, thanking them for their support over the years and saying he appreciated genuine fans who understood the value of hard work and respect. The audience erupted into supportive applause, surprising Jimmy, whose forced smile faltered. Then Stallone finally looked at Jimmy, telling him that comedy built on cruelty wasn't comedy at all. Jimmy tried one more time to turn the moment into a bit, but the desperation in his tone made it worse. Stallone gave a small nod to the crew, then began walking toward the backstage exit. As Stallone disappeared behind the curtain, the studio buzzed with stunned whispers and scattered applause, leaving Jimmy alone under the bright lights with a shaken expression he couldn't mask. He tried joking that Stallone would come back after cooling off, but the audience didn't buy it, and his words landed awkwardly in the tense air. Jimmy eventually tried shifting into the next segment, but the energy felt fractured, and the cameras captured the unmistakable discomfort settling across the stage. Meanwhile, backstage, Stallone remained composed, speaking calmly with staff members and reminding them that the situation wasn't their fault, only the result of a disrespectful approach disguised as entertainment. Online, the clip would soon explode across social media, sparking debates, reactions, and millions of views within hours, with many praising Stallone for standing up for himself. Hollywood would buzz with shock, viewers would replay the moment endlessly, and the message Sylvester Stallone delivered without shouting would echo everywhere, that dignity always outweighs spectacle. In the hours following Stallone's abrupt walkout, the internet erupted into a storm of reactions, with clips spreading across every platform faster than the show's team could respond. And what surprised everyone most was how overwhelmingly the public sided with Sylvester rather than Jimmy, whose attempts to defend his behavior only fueled the backlash. Comment sections filled with viewers calling out the disrespect Stallone endured, praising him for maintaining composure despite being repeatedly pushed, while others criticized Jimmy for crossing personal boundaries that no host should breach in the name of entertainment. Hollywood insiders anonymously weighed in, revealing that Stallone had long been known for professionalism and loyalty, further intensifying the narrative that Jimmy's approach was deliberately provocative rather than accidental. As analysts on entertainment networks dissected every second of the confrontation, Stallone remained silent, allowing the moment to speak for itself, demonstrating a level of restraint that added even more weight to his decision to walk out. Meanwhile, Jimmy struggled to regain control of the public narrative, issuing a stiff explanation that he had just been joking. But audiences had already made their judgment, turning the incident into a defining moment not only for Stallone's unshakable dignity, but also for the shifting expectations viewers now placed on talk show hosts who once believed shock value was enough to keep audiences entertained. As the fallout continued to spread, major entertainment outlets began publishing detailed breakdowns of the tense exchange, highlighting every moment where Jimmy's jokes shifted into pointed jabs, and every instance where Stallone tried to steer the conversation back toward professionalism before finally deciding enough was enough. And the more people rewatched the clip, the clearer it became that the clash hadn't been a misunderstanding, but the result of deliberate provocation. Fans of Stallone flooded social media with messages of support, sharing stories of meeting him over the years, describing him as humble, generous, and deeply respectful, qualities that starkly contrasted with the version Jimmy attempted to paint on live television. Industry veterans chimed in as well, some suggesting that the era of talk show hosts relying on humiliation for laughs was rapidly fading, replaced by a new expectation for authenticity and respect. Meanwhile, Jimmy's own viewers voiced disappointment, stating that the interview felt less like entertainment and more like a setup designed to corner a guest. Through all of this, Stallone continued to remain silent publicly, allowing the wave of reaction to unfold naturally, and his silence became its own powerful statement, a reminder that true strength didn't always require loud responses but the courage to walk away from anything that diminished one's integrity.